In many ways, the historic Wells Park neighborhood north of downtown Albuquerque encapsulates both the promise and the problems of urban growth. Over centuries, the area has been transformed from farmland and swamps to industrial and commercial uses, and now to a lively mix of historic homes, breweries, artists' studios, and small businesses, all while serving as a major transportation corridor. But its history as one of the city's first major employment centers also brought with it struggles with air, water, and ground pollution. And residents now grapple with the city's ever-growing homeless population. Despite these concerns, many residents would live nowhere else. Still, the question remains, can the neighborhood survive without losing its historic character?
Oh, the best thing about living in Wells Park is that you know who your neighbors are.
It's a good little community. It's not as crazy as some and crazier than others.
There's a lot of opportunity down here. We don't have a mall close by or even a grocery store, but it's working.
Everything's accessible from this area. I feel like we're in the heart of the city.
I don't know what it is, but once you live here, people don't want to leave.
It's a very old neighborhood, but it seems like it still has that little small town atmosphere, so all the neighbors, they know each other, and basically everyone's really friendly with each other.
That's what brings me happiness, is walking through the neighborhood and seeing that the neighborhood is still continuing to grow.
This is one of the next great neighborhoods in Albuquerque. It's already great, but it's going to be even better.
Once home to Tiwa-speaking peoples, Spanish settlers colonized the area after the arrival of Juan de Oñate in 1598. The Pueblo Revolt of 1680 forced the settlers to flee, but many returned after the Reconquest in 1692. In 1706, the governor of New Mexico, Francisco Cuervo y Valdez, officially designated the community as a royally chartered town and named it La Villa Real de San Francisco de Albuquerque. The grant included the area surrounding Old Town, including what would become Wells Park and a number of smaller settlements along the Rio Grande. Possession of the grant land would pass to Mexico in 1821 and to the United States in 1848. The area around Old Town would remain predominantly farmland until well into the 20th century. In the late 1800s, prominent local photographer Emma Albright and her husband John, Kansas transplants, began acquiring property from land grant descendants in the area that would become Wells Park. The acquisitions were not without controversy, according to some of the area's older residents.
But the problem is that they gave them pennies on the dollar for their land. When they wanted to plat this land to do the first development, that's when the city and the United States of America got involved and found out that they had bought all this land for next to nothing and had intimidated a lot of people actually to made them buy and to sell to them.
The ownership of the land remained in dispute, and a case involving the city of Albuquerque versus the United States went to the Supreme Court in 1898. Finally, in 1901, through an act of Congress, the United States relinquished its interest in the Albuquerque land grant and required the city to issue deeds to the former landowners to make the land sales official and to fairly compensate them.
A lot of these people didn't want to sell. They wanted to keep their land, but they were, the Albrights were a very important and influential family and very wealthy, and so they were able to make them sell them the land. Now, like I said, Congress did make them eventually pay them back some money, but they didn't say you can have your lands back.
One of the area's first major employers, the American Lumber Company, set up shop in the early 1900s. Within 3 years of opening its mill, the company employed more than 850 people.
Mountain Road is originally called Carnuel Road, and they used to bring they'd log or cut the wood up in Carnuel and Manzano and Sandias and stuff and bring it down Mountain Road all the way down to the sawmill that was right here off of, at that time the sawmill was on this side of 12th Street. It was in the Wells Park area.
By 1908, The American Lumber Company was reportedly the largest lumbering enterprise in the Southwest. In addition to a sawmill, it included its own electric plant, built by the Albuquerque Gas and Electric Company, all connected by 5 miles of railroad track.
And then because they expanded, because they started to get more workers and stuff, that's when they moved over to the other side, and they made a trolley street to pick up the workers and all this and take them to work.
It was a big operation. They had a cabinet, building, box making, all kinds of things. My grandfather was Tomas Duran, and he was from the Duran family in Old Town. And his father was Miguel Duran. And I've traced our Duran family back to 1657. My grandfather had the store here on the corner of the property, and it was called La Tienda de la Máquina de Rajar, the sawmill store. And he opened the store to service the people from the American Lumber Company, because 12th Street ended right after this house, and the American Lumber Company was there, and there was, at one point, there was thousands of employees. He would sell groceries, he would sell clothes, he had a tailor shop, he just was dry goods, anything you wanted he had in the store. The trolley came down from Central, at that time New York, and came and turned around right here in front of the house. So this was the last stop, because the gates to the sawmill actually were closed. You didn't just drive in, you had to work there. They had a guard station and everything, so it was pretty interesting. He built the house for my grandmother as a wedding present, and they married in October of 1900. So I figure the house was being built in the 1890s. It stayed in the family all these years.
Other businesses sprang up nearby to service the workers.
The property, from the research I've done, I think it was built in 1881, and it opened up, I think, originally as just a hotel. And then in 1902, 1903, the American Lumber Corporation opened up the sawmill for the neighborhood right across the street. And back then, with a ratio of probably 5 men to every 1 woman, I think the owners decided it would make sense to kind of convert this place from a fledgling hotel into an actual brothel. And with the the blue-collar workforce right across the street, I think this place kind of boomed. So it was a saloon. It was actually called the Swastika Saloon. It was billed itself as having a wine room and connection, a dance hall with wine room and connection, and back then a wine room was kind of code for brothel. And this is back when brothels were actually legal in Albuquerque, from 1881 to about 1914. So it was a saloon out front, you'd enter, and then there was a long hallway that ran the length of the building, and it was an 8-room brothel. So it was kind of interesting history,
Farmland buffered housing from the sawmill activity until the 1940s. In the 1950s, the influence of Old Town spread, and the area saw an expansion of residential areas along with more industrial businesses. Growing up in post-World War II Wells Park, current and former residents recall a close-knit community that extended beyond today's neighborhood boundaries.
Wells Park was everything west of the railroad tracks, and what was east of the railroad tracks was Martinez Town. And then when we got down to Rio Grande was Old Town. And then the country club was, that was pretty clear line, that was Central going south. And so what is in between? Wells Park. This was all Wells Park down here. To the north of us was Duranes, and that was, of course, what we now would say north of the freeway. It was a mixed community, of course. We had some Native Americans that lived here. We had it all. We had some African American families that lived down the street. There was more than a few. And of course, everybody else that compromised a good, wholesome community. You name it, and we had it. But this was a working class neighborhood where anybody that had a job did really well, and we all took care of one another.
Neighborhoods were, I guess they had character to them. It was really nice in a way. It was a Hispanic neighborhood, mostly the workers that worked in the sawmill and in all those, the industrial areas up on 4th Street. They had service jobs, that type of thing, but they'd lived there for ages, a long time. These families were there a long time.
This was a great place to grow up. And I imagine other neighborhoods are the same way, but this was my neighborhood. It was, you were safe back then. I had the Cleaver family neighborhood, basically. Of course, Albuquerque was different back in those days. Down on 11th Street, especially like now in the summer months, when school was out, we'd be out there till 9, 10 o'clock at night, playing in the streets, riding our bicycles, playing football.
Kent Salazar's father, a retired military veteran, opened a gas station at 12th and Mountain.
About 1960, and so I was about 10 or 11. We had a large family and everybody worked, and that's what I did. I worked for my father down there. I ran the gas pumps at night. I would go to school and then I would take the bus down there, and or he'd pick me up and I'd go down there, and then he'd go home at 6 o'clock. He'd go home, have supper, rest, and then 11 o'clock at night he'd come back and take the money, close up, and take me home, and then I'd go to bed. I would wash their windows, check all their fluids, their tires, I'd vacuum out the car, do whatever they needed on it, and I'd usually sell them some product like Bardol or something like that. That always scared me, because I was at night there and I thought, oh my God, they're gonna come get me, for my $100 cash drawer, So I would hide the cash under the oil cans and in the back, and I would sit there, but everybody was really nice at that time. It was a scary thing, and you think about being a child worker like that, but it was the neighborhood that made it kind of nice, for me anyway. I felt safe in that neighborhood with the people.
A city park, then known as the 6th and Mountain Park, was renamed Wells Park in honor of city manager Charles E. Wells in 1951. The Wells Park Community Center would eventually be built on the site. For kids and families, it would become the center of their activities.
Wells Park is Wells Park Community Center. I mean, that is very important to me.
Well, Wells Park has always been the focal area of the neighborhood. Wells Park services have always served Wells Park, downtown, Sawmill area, Martineztown, because they don't have community center. So the kids would all come down there.
Well, the community center at first was a fire station. That's what it was. It was not a community center. It was a fire station. The old part right there on the corner of 5th Street and Mountain Road, that's the old fire station. And then later on came the gym and all of that. That's when the community center actually formed and stuff. But before that, we all just used to come to the fire station because they had a little cement pond, what we called a cement pond, which was like a pool.
We thought it was huge. It was a swimming pool. It was actually a wading pool. But are you kidding? Water, we could get wet. And middle of the hot summer days and air conditioning unknown of at that particular time. We're talking 50s now, right?
They were worried about us getting polio or either spreading it or getting it. And so what they would do is they had buckets of water with Clorox in it. And so what you had to do is you had to go step in the bucket, get the Clorox water and wash yourself all up, and everything. And then you could go in and get in the cement pond. And then when you got out of the cement pond, then you got back into the into the pails of water and washed yourself again and stuff. And then you could go play. We all smelled like Clorox. The flies didn't bother us, so it worked out okay. We were all pretty clean, let me tell you, But that's when they realized that community center needed to be formed, and I think it was I'm not certain on this, but I'm thinking it was the first community center that was put down here in this area to service all these children and stuff.
But we had a lot of programs there. We learned how to color. We had Easter hunts. We had Halloween programs there, Christmas programs there. We had a lot of things going on there. A lot of kids all my friends went there.
They go to the community center for like bingo or dances. They'd have their weddings there in the neighborhood. That's what the neighborhood was about, those type of things. We went to church in the neighborhood. You know, we did all those things in the neighborhood.
I remember at night, we would come back to Wells Park because there was a basketball court there. It was one of the better basketball courts. And who played there was important because the Lobos used to come, the Lobo men used to come and play at the community center at night, and that would get packed up by the community. Parents, kids, family members, everybody would stack all around and watch the Lobos play, pick up basketball games against other teams. Big for us.
We had a lot of hot young guys and we needed something to do, so we started these summer basketball leagues. And we had the open, league where it's the college guys and guys that were, needed a place to play in the thing. Really good ball players. I mean, these were some of the guys that went pro later on. And it's pretty exciting. If you watch the open leagues, these were the college guys. Ira Harge, Mel Daniels, Michael Cooper at one time even played in some of those leagues. These were really good ball players.
As automobile travel exploded in the 20th century, so did use of the much-traveled North 4th Street, which passed through Wells Park. Businesses sprang up along the entire length of the road, which for about a decade was part of the famed Route 66.
In our times, it was a bustling metropolitan center. That's the way we would probably look at it. 4th Street was the street where you're going to be able to find everything from bakeries to the banks.
One of the places on 4th Street that was famous was Polly's. And Polly's was a restaurant, and a very commercial, big restaurant. The Greyhound buses would stop there when they came into Albuquerque. And so the people would get off and they would sell, the native Indians would come and sell jewelry and tell people, and they had maps, and it was a place to be seen.
But the city's decision to introduce a new zoning code in 1959 portended the decline of Wells Park and surrounding downtown neighborhoods.
Well, during the 70s and stuff, all the historical neighborhoods around, Newtown and stuff, were already in decline. The part of the decline that was happening was because of the zoning that came in the late 50s and the way that they zoned it. They had the type of zoning that they used to do back then was specific to big cities. And it did not fit in with our town the way it is and the little roads that we had and everything. And so it was detrimental to the neighborhoods. These were really nice little neighborhoods. But when they brought in, let in all the wrecking yards and junk yards and all these unsavourable businesses into the neighborhood, it started to bring it to decline. Now what happened there is then the banks would not lend you money if you lived in these areas because they felt that they were going to lose money, so they wouldn't. So that created the slums that we have. It wasn't because of the people didn't want to work on their homes or fix them or whatever and stuff, but it was because of that fact that we could not get banks to work with us at that time. So by the time that I moved in, that Fred and I got married and came here, at that time, model cities had come in during the 60s and everything and had destroyed pretty much a lot of these historic neighborhoods here with what they did. They got this bright idea that they were just going to rebuild everything and knock down and they knocked down a lot of the history. They knocked down a lot of our historic buildings along with the housing and stuff. Like I said, in Odelia, in Martinez Town, Santa Barbara, that street there, that was houses all the way up to the hills. But at the time when model cities came in, what they did is they did public domain on those lands and they made the people move. They only gave them 1 month to move. I remember coming in, walking, and people were all freaked out because there was yellow signs posted on all the doors telling them that they had to move, and they were giving them $1,500. That's what they gave them for their property. Everybody got $1,500, and then it was up to them as to where they were going to move or what. And as we were helping people move out and loading up their furniture and stuff into truck, the tractors were coming and knocking down the houses. You know, and so it was horrific. People were crying and everything. And
by the 1970s, as property values declined and the neighborhood deteriorated, community residents realized the need to organize.
Well, this neighborhood here was really in decline as far as the gangs had taken over, and the fact that majority of the people, that the elder seniors and stuff, had passed away. So there was a lot of housing stock that was left, and it was the California speculation that came in and started buying all these houses because they could buy them really cheap. But what they were doing is they were just renting them, and so they were absentee landlords. They didn't live here. They didn't care who they rented to and stuff. So we ended up getting infested with a lot of drug houses, and like I said, the gangs, the graffiti that, you know, the gangs took over the community center. That's where they were dealing drugs out of and stolen merchandise, you know, from the homes and stuff. And so it was at that time that Fred and I decided that we had to get involved, because we wanted to raise a family here, and we did not want the neighborhood to be this way. So that's when my father-in-law, my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law, myself and Fred and 2 other neighbors started the neighborhood association. Ours formed in 1979.
And from there it just grew and grew and grew, and we found out that, you know, hey, that's when we found out that yes, you can fight City Hall, because back then it was common rule, you can fight City Hall. And we found out from talking to other organizers and so on and so forth that yes, you can fight City Hall, but there's a way to do it. So.
And when we went, the first time we went, they laughed at us. And we kept showing up, and we were learning. See, that's the thing, is they didn't realize that we were as smart as we were. We were picking up everything. We were finding out every time they would tell us, no, you can't do that because of this, this, and this. Well, the next time we went, we had this, and this, you know, and they're like, you know, they could not turn down our requests.
The association eventually banded together with other downtown neighborhoods to increase their clout, including San Jose, South Broadway, Martineztown, Los Duranes, and Barelas.
What the city decided to do is they would say, we have X amount of money. We have $500,000 for improvements in your neighborhood. And they would say, these monies are open, you need to submit for them and stuff. So all of us, all the neighborhoods, everybody submits for everything they want. We want the whole goddamn million, man. We don't want just 10,000. We want the whole million. So everybody goes in with that attitude. Well, what happens is we called it the shark feed. While we're fighting for all this monies and all of this and everything, the city would go behind us and say, well, the communities can't come to a consensus, so therefore we are going to do it how we think is proper. And so that's how we learned really quick that they were really good about doing that. So that's how the coalition came. And so we decided how we were going to split up these monies amongst ourselves, and went in full force with a full package of all the neighborhoods together and stuff, and they could not dispute it at that point.
The seeds for community organizing were planted in the 1960s, Jesse Size explained, during the height of the movement to reclaim land grants in northern New Mexico, led by charismatic preacher Reies Lopez Tijerina. His organization, Alianza Federal de Mercedes, was headquartered nearby.
The Alianza was located at, I believe it was 3rd and Mountain Road. That was Reies Tijerina. Reies Tijerina was a, I don't know if you want to call him a Mexican activist or a Hispanic activist throughout the state. And he was based out of our neighborhood. And there was a meeting hall, and some people say they were very radical, other people saying they were terrorists, Other people saying that that's what we need. But Reies Tijerina, in my opinion, was one of the main factors that brought attention to neighborhoods of color, poor neighborhoods, that how businesses, government, and everything else kind of just ignores them, gives them and throws out a few crumbs and stuff like that.
They were trying to get the Hispanic people to stand up for their rights, you know, and stuff because of eminent domain and all this stuff that was going on, and telling people you can, you know, speak against the government. Yes, you can speak against, you know, City Hall and all this, you know, and so they were known as rebels because, you know, they were bad people because, you know, they were instigating. You know, City Hall considered them, and the politicians considered them, you know, troublemakers. But really, it wasn't that it was trouble that they were trying to pass on. It was them trying to tell people that it was okay to stand up and speak for themselves. So it wasn't until really my generation that things started to change among Hispanics.
The Alianza was, they helped teach people that no, we're not second-class people. We're just as good as anyone in town, and we deserve the same type of treatment.
Everybody, even the old people, you know, you always walked and you always did the, you know, raza, que viva la raza, you know, that type of thing. That was basically what it was.
With some successes under its belt, the Neighborhood Association tackled the long-standing problem of environmental pollution that enveloped the area, caused by companies including Duke City Lumber, Ponderosa Products, Public Service Company of New Mexico, gas stations and dairy farms, among others.
The problem that we had with our environment and stuff were the sawmills. The sawmills were, working with their lumber, and they had water wells and stuff that were not lined, and they used a lot of really harsh chemicals, for the woods and all of this, and that stuff seeped into our water. Our aquifer and stuff. So to begin with, we started off with bad water. But the main thing that was really horrible, because I remember when we moved here in 1974, is you couldn't even hang your clothes in the clothesline because there would be a soot that would get on all your clothes.
I think prompted Leo and I to get in to be activists in our Wells Park neighborhood is when we first got together, and he would wash the car, and the next morning it would be full of sawdust, and it was horrible. And I would tell him, you can't have a clean car living here, and it was because. And then we started, and I started explaining to him because of the sawmill and the open stacks, and they would burn, and it was everywhere. And so by that time, we grew up enough to where we figured out something had to be done.
So at that time, that's when Sawmill Advisory Council formed to be able to fight the sawmills and the pollution that was going on in their side. By the time that these changes were going on, friends of ours, Rick Miera, had become the representative of this area. So, and he was born and raised in this area right here on 11th Street and everything. And so he knew our issues and everything and what we were going through.
They started making plywood, and to put plywood, they had to glue it together. And after they finished with their glue, they would just throw everything on the ground. P&M was no different. Many years ago, there was the main station was right on what is now the 12th and the freeway. That's where they made power for the rest of the city, and so they would use oil as a way of making the electricity, and then they clean out those oil tanks and they just throw it in the ground. I mean, there was not the concern about that. So a lot of things were going on, as you can well expect, that people didn't care about. But when we found out about it, we had to do something. I had to do something about it. And so we put P&M on notice. They came and they cleaned everything out. They took all the dirt and they took it someplace else. I think they took it to Texas. But I just know that we didn't want it here and it went someplace else. We closed down the plant that Great Britain had and said, you know what, you cannot do that anymore. We're not going to allow that, because at the end of the night you also burn all this stuff and it's getting into the neighborhood. We're finding ash everywhere. We will stop that. I got the people that is now known as the Old Town area and got them collaboratively together and said, we're going to do something about this. We're going to sue if we have to. We'll take everybody to court. We got to do what we have to do, and we did it. We shut it down, and what became of the old area that we knew as the polluters and so forth, people are now living on it because we cleaned it up. There's brand new housing going on. There's breweries on those corners back to the west side of 12th Street. We got that, we reclaimed that area.
In the long run, we won. We got it closed down, we got all of that pollution, we got money to do some cleanup, and life is much better.
But we had to do that. It didn't come just easily. It came with people working together with me to make sure that this was going to happen, and we did. We're making it happen, and we continue to fight that, whether it's air pollution, groundwater pollution, or whatever.
As activists like the Romeros and the Seises left the neighborhood to a new generation, one problem remains a challenge: dealing on a daily basis with the bulk of Albuquerque's homeless population.
Since I've lived here all my life, there always has been homeless. Of course, then they used to call them hobos, and it was mostly men. That's where it started and stuff. And then, so what happened is the city in all its glory decided that what would be good is to centralize all the services for the homeless and for the mentally ill and stuff, all in one corridor, which happens to be Varela's and Wells Park.
Within Wells Park, we have healthcare for the homeless. We have St. Martin's, now what works. We have Coronado Park, which is not a service provider, but it's sort of its own entity. And then right on the other side of the freeway, which is right on the other side of I-40, which is technically near North Valley, but right on our boundary is both Steel Bridge and the Rock at Noonday.
Go there in the afternoons about 4 or 5 o'clock, and I'm pretty guarantee you won't drive through there again, because frankly, it's scary. The city has designated Coronado Park as a pickup and drop-off point for the shelters up in the west side and so on and so forth.
That park has been an issue in this neighborhood since as long as I can remember, because people were already congregating there. I think it was easy for the city to just say, let's designate this as a pickup location for the shelter, and then it became known as the homeless park, and then different other sort of faith-based groups and community groups feed people there, so it's sort of like snowballed, and now it's become this thing that no one really wants to take on. So that's one of the things that we're trying to address with the city, is that we've told them time and again they really need to take responsibility for that park, they need to do something. I don't know exactly what the answer is, but I think step one, which we've told them numerous times, is you need to make it no longer the city's only designated pickup drop-off location for the West Side Shelter.
Longtime Wells Park business owners Jerry Mitchell and Frank Garcia say the homeless have brought an increase in crime to the area, ranging from burglary and arson to physical assaults.
So it seems like a lot of people in the area were getting victimized by this problem, and you know what? People in the neighborhood are just getting really, not afraid, I would say, but they feel like we're the victims now. Like, no one's really supporting us or the neighborhood people, for our rights. Everyone has the rights of the homeless, and ACLU, they got their back, but what about the people, the taxpayers in the neighborhood?
If this homeless problem isn't addressed, it's going to get worse. Crime will go up, but there's always hope that they're going to do something to where they're going to address the problem. My understanding is they're really working hard on it. Mayor Keller and his staff and stuff, they're trying to get a grip of it.
Neighbors say they want the city and the various providers to take more responsibility for the transient population in the neighborhood.
I want them to be good neighbors, and I want them to acknowledge and take some responsibility for the impacts that they are having.
We believe in helping, and we've done our share of it. And we don't mind having some of these facilities in our community. And I hate to say that, but this was our battle cry. What kind of homeless facility is in Tanawan? Not one.
I think what hurts Leo and I the most is they're young. Some of them are just young kids, you know, it's like, my goodness, you know, where did you go wrong?
I think what we should try focusing on is more organizations like the Joy Junction, where they help people, they feed them, they house them,
Yeah.
and they help them get back on their feet. And a lot of organizations out here don't either have the backbone or they don't have the time. Whichever it is, they're not helping them help themselves.
Perhaps it is appropriate that 5-time world champion boxer Johnny Tapia proudly called Wells Park home. Like Wells Park, he faced many challenges in his rise to prominence.
Johnny Tapia used to live down the street on Bellama, so we knew him as a kid. He'd come by and talk to us and stuff. So me and my husband.
About what he
yeah.
wanted to be.
Johnny, he was such a sweet guy, a fantastic kid, a great personality, very respectful, was brought up to respect. His grandma and grandpa lived right here on 8th Street in Bellama, right just down the street. And the Tapias have always been known to be a rough family, you know, and they were all boxers. Grandpa was a boxer. He was a Golden Glove champion. So him being a child of the streets and stuff, me having my son being his same age, they went to school together. They became friends. And my son, Carlos, brought him over and asked me, Mom, can Johnny stay for supper? And that's when I started learning about this kid, that he had nothing and that he had no place, and he ate whenever he ate, whoever gave him whatever it was that they had. I was getting the kids ready for school and everything, and little Johnny was sitting in that front porch, that stool, that step right there in front of my little porch. And and he was crying, and that's when I you know, Juanito, what is wrong? You know, Johnny, you know, ¿qué pasa? You know, and that's when he told me, you know, they found my mama dead. He didn't know, he was just a little kid. So he didn't know any of what happened or whatever, but he just knew that his grandma and grandpa had just told him that his mama had been killed.
He'd be walking down the street, sparring, doing this stuff.
Yeah.
When he was working out here in town, when he was still here in town, working out for a fight, he'd run around the neighborhood. And I remember he stopped by one day and he says, "You got a trash bag?" I said, "Yeah." So I gave him a trash bag, and he cut a hole in it, took off his t-shirt and put it on, and then put his t-shirt on top of it. He says, I need to get a little better sweat going. And he'd thank you, and he'd take off. Johnny was something. He had his demons, unfortunately, and he could never shake them. But in general, he's one of the nicest guys that you want to meet in the community.
When he got money, that's when drugs came. Drugs found him, and criminal activity or whatever they accused him of, but he was a good kid. He really was. You know, money attracts all of that, in my mind.
He worked very hard for what he got.
He did, he worked hard for it.
Johnny Tapia, at the time that he passed away, they came to, I believe I was the president of the association at the time, and they came to me and they wanted to dedicate the park, the community center, put it in his name, Johnny Tapia Park, or whatever. So we made an agreement, and they dedicated the gym in his name. And I thought that's fine. He's part of the community. I don't have a problem with that. But then after I left office, from what I understand, city councilors from another district came into ours and wanted to change the community center to Johnny Tapia Wells Park.
Johnny had Wells Park tattooed all over him. He was very proud of being from Wells Park. But they don't know, you know, the trouble he used to get into in the neighborhood before. So people were very upset when they said that they were going to change Wells Park Community Center to Johnny Tapia Community Center, because people said this is not Johnny Tapia Community, it is Wells Park Community. And even though many people like myself will talk highly of Johnny, because I loved him, you know, he was like my little son. He's a good kid, but he had the demons that he could just not run away from.
I went in a little bit upset because they didn't want to accept the name of Johnny Tapia. And I believe he had more right to have that name in there because he lived there, he struggled there, he was a part of an inspiration for half of his people in Wells Park.
That's true.
And I went in there and I scolded them, and they listened to me, and I didn't know how they were going to accept it, but I wanted Johnny in there because he's big.
Despite the challenges, the neighborhood continues to transform as the area becomes more desirable for small businesses, developers, and folks who want to live in the downtown core.
So Wells Park is interesting because it's such a mixed area, right? So we've got commercial, industrial, residential, and I think that the business character of the neighborhood has really changed over the years. I think it used to be a lot more kind of manufacturing type, and now it tends to be more either professional office space, or we have a lot of breweries and restaurants now.
When I moved in 2014, I mean, I've already seen a ton of change in the neighborhood. Tractor Brewing relocated from Los Lunas to their brewery now on 4th Street, and they've been there for 5 years now. I've seen 5 other breweries pop up in this neighborhood. There's been coffee shops that have opened up. And then I've seen, since I've kind of rehabbed this property, I've seen other properties in Wells Park that people have, fixed up and have either sold or have made them a place for themselves to live, which is fantastic, So it's definitely getting, bringing new life into this neighborhood. I like the fact that it's kind of mixed use. It's a lively neighborhood. There's always something that's happening down here.
That's what brings me happiness, is walking through the neighborhood and seeing that the neighborhood is still continuing to grow, and stuff, that even though it's such an old neighborhood, it's like a new child that is developing again.
We're seeing some change now. Where I used to work is now a restaurant, the stores are torn down and we see new fancy shops coming up and stuff like that. But just remember that this neighborhood had a good history to it, and there were good people that lived in there.
I grew up here, and my kids grew up here, and some of them are staying here, and we're all going to move on, but a great place to say we had something to do with how Wells Park matured and changed, and it's going to change yet again, all for the better.
I think this neighborhood has been around long enough and sustained, it's gone through a lot and it's always survived, and I think it will continue to survive. And I think that there are people that have lived in this neighborhood for a really long time that really care about preserving it, and there are people that have not lived here very long and love this neighborhood and also want to do whatever it takes to preserve it. I have not found personally anyone that's moved into this neighborhood in recent years not love it. And despite its flaws, every neighborhood has its flaws, and I think maybe we have more than our fair share of, like I said, a transient population, or maybe even some crime because it's an older neighborhood, it's close to downtown. But I don't know what it is, but once you live here, people don't want to leave.
I would like people to know that Wells Park is a great place to live. We're in a good location, we're close to downtown, we're close to jobs, we're close to opportunities, lots of restaurants. We're close to the freeway, and I think most of all that there's still good people here. There's still good people that live in the neighborhood and that care.
What I like about Wells Park is the people. They still have the love for their neighborhood, the love for their families, and the need to get involved.
We've come a long way, baby. We've come a long way, you know.